July 1962, and an unsuspecting world has not yet heard of the Beatles, and John, Paul, George, without Ringo, have only just completed their first recording session at Abbey Road. Marilyn Monroe appears on the cover of Life magazine for the last time. The US military begins using Agent Orange in Vietnam, and Telstar, the world's first telecommunications satellite, is launched and beams live pictures from Europe to the US, heralding the birth of global communications. Few people at the time foresaw the possibilities that were unlocked by the new technology, but it so captured the imagination of Joe Meek that it inspired him to write a tune. In a golden age of pop instrumentals, Telstar spent 5 weeks at the top of the British charts and was #1 on both sides of the Atlantic. Meek was a brilliant young sound engineer working out of an upstairs studio he'd built in suburban London. He was a perfectionist and loved to experiment in his studio. His recordings had impact, which set them apart from the competition, and Joe Meek was hot property in the early 60s.
Have I the right to hold you? You know I've always told you that we must never, ever part.
But his commercial success was short-lived, and Meek's turbulent world was to become increasingly erratic. He was homosexual at a time when it was illegal to be a gay man in Britain. In 1967, after being taunted by his landlady about the noise from his studio once too often, he simply flew into a rage and shot her before turning the gun on himself. The 60s are often nostalgically referred to as fabulous, and fabulous they were, but it was also one of the most tumultuous decades of the 20th century. At its close, everything, from religion to sexuality to capitalism itself, was up for discussion. Nowadays, it's become increasingly clear that the era of global communications is a two-edged sword, and that there's a price to be paid for this technology. But back in July 1962, Joe Meek was inspired by it and was busy grafting a futuristic keyboard sound to the tornado's driving rhythm. On the threshold of that extraordinary decade, our old values were still intact, and our hopes for the future soared briefly on the wings of Joe Meek's unforgettable melody.